In this lecture, we're going to start using behavior events to link what happens in our behavior tree to the rest of our game. Let's get started. What is a behavior event? Behavior events are effectively delegates, just like what we used on our event bus, but they work in the behavior tree. This enables nodes to talk to one another in a decoupled fashion. And since they are defined on the blackboard, we can also listen to them from our code. That's going to be the primary thing that we use them for in this course. Let's start here in Unity in our worker behavior tree. Right now, when we gather, our worker is going back and forth looking like they're doing something, but it doesn't really hook up to the rest of our code. We are depleting gatherable supplies, but we're never granting the player any of those supplies. The worker is just going back and forth between the gatherable supply and the command post. What we can do is raise an event once self moves to command post completes, saying, hey, we've gathered those supplies. To do that, we need to add an event channel to our blackboard. Let's go ahead and click plus on the blackboard, events, and we need to create a new event channel type. Let's do that. Let's call it gather supplies event channel. Click next. And again, we have a story for this, so it'll show up just like any of our action nodes. Self gathers amount supplies, where self is a game object, amount is an int, and supplies is a supply scriptable object. If we search for supply, we can see supply SO shows up, and we'll just have to add it to our blackboard in a minute. And we can see the preview here, where we can raise an event that's going to be the send, and we can also have something wait for a particular event to happen. That's how we can get that decoupled communication between our nodes and our branches. Let's go ahead and click create, and that's going to go in our same place, scripts, behavior, save it there. And generally on these classes, we don't have to change anything. In more recent versions of the tools, this may be resolved, but on the version I'm on, which is 1.0.3, it doesn't put the class in the right namespace, and it doesn't properly import our custom types like supply scriptable object. So just to make sure, open up this class in VS Code, add a using GameDevTV RTS environment at the top so it knows about our supply SO. And let's put it in our GameDevTV RTS behavior namespace. Again, this may or may not be required depending on when you're watching this and what changes have happened since 1.0.3. We don't need to care about anything that happens in here. The only thing we're going to interact with is this event, which we can see is just a delegate function. The rest of this is some boilerplate that makes it work in the behavior tree. Once we've corrected that compile error and moved that to the right namespace, this dialog should close. On the blackboard, we can now call this the gather supplies event. And down here in our sequence, right after we've moved to the command post, let's add a new node under events, send event message. Move that as the last node in our gather sequence. We can drag our gather supplies event. It transforms into that story. We can say self, gathers supply amount held. But remember, we don't have a supply SO yet. So let's add that to our blackboard. We can add new variable, search for supply. We'll find that supply SO. Let's call it supply SO. And maybe reorder it right under our supply. We can hook that up to our event here. Now, we need to post a value to our supply SO, but before we get into writing any code, let's make it where we reset our supply amount held after we've raised this event. We can do that by adding a new node called set variable value. This gives us a node that just sets a Blackboard variable value to whatever we specify. We can drag that to be the last node in our sequence. Say we want to set supply amount held to 0. Do you know where we should post a supply SO to the blackboard? That's going to be here on our gather supplies action. So let's hop into VS Code. And how do you think we should post that value to the blackboard? We probably don't want this to show up on the story because that becomes a little bit verbose. So we should add a serialized reference, public blackboard variable of type supply SO called supply SO. And on start, when we're going to gather, we can grab that supply SO and assign it from our gatherable supplies with supply SO.value equals gatherable supplies.value.supply. That will post the value to the blackboard and override it as long as we assign it here back in Unity. As long as we assign the supply SO, now this blackboard variable will get updated based on the gatherable supply that we are gathering from, and it'll be ready to be sent on this event channel. The reason we want to do it like this is we want to prevent any null reference exceptions in case that supply here gets fully depleted. Remember, we're going to destroy that object, so we don't want it to be null and try to reference it here. The supply SO we know will never be destroyed. Now we want to hook into this event because our behavior tree will raise this event up to us. So let's hop into VS Code in our worker script because only workers can gather, right? They are the only ones with gather. So what we can do is on start, grab a reference to that delegate function. Remember that abstract unit also defines a start. So we'll do protected override void start. And in there, we'll call base.start. We can do graph agent.get variable. And the name of that variable was gather supplies event. And it gives us out a Blackboard variable of type gather supplies event channel. We can name that event channel variable. And now get variable returns true or false depending on whether it successfully got that variable. We can think of it as behaving like the try get component on the mono behavior. So we can wrap that in an if, and if that returns true, that means we know this out variable is populated, and we can do event channel variable dot value dot event plus equals handle gather supplies. Let's define that handler, private void, handle gather supplies, which of course accepts the variables in the story on the Blackboard, a game object self, an int amount, and a supply SO supply. In this case, what we want to do is raise an event on our event bus so we can update things like our UI and our player storage of these gathered supplies. Now, I know we haven't gotten to all that yet, but clearly we need to know the amount that was gathered each time, and we already know the type. And that's this lecture's challenge. Create a new supply event and raise it on the event bus when the worker receives an event on the gather supply event channel from the behavior tree. I know now we're reaching back to some stuff we've done before, so I hope you remember how to do that. If not, don't be afraid to look at events we've already created. Pause the video, implement that, and once you've raised that event on the event bus, I'll see you right back here. All right, welcome back. I hope you're able to do that. I know we haven't touched the event bus in a few lectures now, but we're going to keep using it. So I hope you could accomplish this one without too much trouble. In our scripts events, we can make a new file called supply event. Put that in our namespace, GameDevTV, RTS events, and make it a public struct supply event that implements the I event. We'll attach a public int amount with a public get and a private set. And also the type of supply is very important here. So we'll make a public supply SO, supply with a public get and a private set. And of course, we make a constructor with the supply event int amount and supply SO, supply, and assign our amount and supply to the amount and supply respectively. Back over in our worker, in handle gather supplies, all we have to do here is bus of type supply event dot raise a new supply event with amount and the supply. And that's all we were looking for in this challenge. If you got this on your own, congratulations. We're not going to have time in this lecture to set up the player supplies and hook it all up together. So just to see that this is indeed working, let's do a little throwaway code on the player input to show the supplies in the console. We're going to remove everything that we're adding into player input right here. Let's make a private int minerals, a serialized field private supply SO minerals SO, a serialized field private supply SO minerals SO, and a serialized field private supply SO gas SO, and also a private int gas. On awake, we can just subscribe to the event bus of type supply event dot on event plus equals, and we'll just define a delegate here because again we're going to remove it. That accepts an EVT with an arrow function, and if the EVT supply equals the mineral SO, we can do minerals plus equals EVT.amount. And if EVT.supply equals gas SO, we can increase the gas by the EVT amount. And we'll just debug.log the minerals and gas so we can see it in the console. Back over in Unity in our scene view, let's hook up that mineral SO and the gas SO on the player input. Come in here and click play. Open up our console, and I've hidden warnings because our air transport logs warnings about not having an animator, and those are fine right now because we haven't gotten to setting up that unit yet, and we want to focus on just the normal logs here. If we select a bunch of workers, send them all here to gather, we should start seeing some debug logs with minerals and gas increasing. Cool. So it looks like it's working correctly, even when we have one gathering gas. That's all we've got for this lecture. The next lecture will hook up actually tying this together with our player having some supplies. So don't forget in player input, remove all of that code we just added in awake, and all the stuff up here at the top about those supplies that doesn't belong in the player input. You might also need to remove some using statements. So when you're ready to move on, I'll see you on the next lecture.